Please give her a round of applause. Rachel Metz, everyone. Thanks.
Hey, welcome back from lunch, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about something called augmented reality. I had a really surreal experience in Fort Lauderdale, Florida last winter. I was standing between some cubicles in a startup's office, minding my own business, when a monster appeared right in front of my eyes. Maybe I should back up a little bit. After almost a year of annoying them, I'm a reporter, so part of my job is to be annoying at times, or often. The guys leading a secretive startup called Magic Leap invited me to fly down and see what they were up to after I harassed them politely enough. I was excited, but I was also really skeptical. Magic Leap is an augmented reality company, which means it's making digital images, like that elephant behind us, appear to mesh with the real world. And I've seen a lot of crappy attempts at augmented reality in the past. But the company has filed some wild-looking patents that made it sound like it might be doing something truly unique and groundbreaking. And it also recently got a huge investment from Google. What I saw was still really far from being a polished consumer product. The company has basically developed a tiny, tiny projector that shines light into your eyes that blends really well with the light that you get from the world around you. And it showed me demonstrations of this with technology that was fixed in place. So first, I was sitting at this big machine in a back room looking through these lenses at the images that they were projecting, and then looking through some lenses on a computer cart that was in the middle of their office where I saw this monster that I mentioned a moment ago. Even so, despite where they were, the progress that they made at showing 3D images like robots and monsters that looked real and fit in with the world around me blew me away. In one demo, I looked through a set of lenses and stretched out my hand, kind of like what you see behind me, although that's not a monster, that's a robot, so that I could watch a tiny blue monster walk on my palm. I knew it wasn't actually there, but it seriously felt real. It was kind of ridiculous. With another demo, I could poke at this tiny little steampunk robot that was like flying around, and it would track with my finger as I sat between some cubicles. This on the top there, that's another thing that I got to play around with. It was like a cadaver head that I had a little controller. I could cut it up and move it around and look at it from different angles. I left Magic Leap feeling like I glimpsed a world where 3D images could be melded with the real world to do all kinds of things. And this future is coming fast. Companies like Magic Leap and Microsoft are working on glasses that will bring augmented reality to consumers, which could enable all kinds of amazing experiences that blend the real and the virtual. In the next couple years, I can imagine interactive games and movies, virtual tour guides actually leading you around Portland or New York or San Francisco, and virtual pets that you can play with but don't actually have to clean up after. Augmented reality can do all these things and more, things like helping doctors perform surgery or students learn in a classroom. And it's going to enable us to feel like we're interacting with friends in our living room, even when they're actually across the country. It's going to change the way we live, work, and interact with the real and digital worlds for the better, and it's going to happen pretty soon. To help understand where augmented reality is at now and where it's going, let's first take a look at a couple key developments in its history that got us where we are today. So let's start with that term, augmented reality. This was actually coined in the 90s by a scientist at Boeing named Thomas Caudell. This is a little diagram of the system that he and his colleague David Meisel, they came up with this in the early 90s. They built a head-worn display for assembly line workers in order to make it easier to assemble long bundles of wires as part of the jet building process. The display was meant to like superimpose lines where the wires would go, just to make it a little quicker. Caudell told me that it didn't catch on because the head tracking that was needed didn't work that well while the workers were moving around. But he did come up with the term augmented reality, and so far that's stuck around. But augmented reality, as we think of it today, has a much longer history than that. This was the first augmented reality display. It was actually built in the 60s by a computing pioneer named Ivan Sutherland at Harvard. It was called the Sword of Damocles because it hung from the ceiling, probably because it was really heavy, and so the wearer then didn't have to like bear the entire weight of the contraption. And it also required a bulky mechanical head position sensor. It used tiny cathode ray tubes to show simple images like this wireframe of a room and molecules. This is a cyclohexane molecule. These are slides that I pulled from an old research paper that Ivan Sutherland did. Many more people have helped with the development of AR as well. Steve Mann, he's a professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Toronto, and he's often credited as the father of wearable computing. He's also had a big hand in it. He's been wearing and building computerized eyewear of all types since he was growing up in the 1970s, including his iTap device, and I believe this is one of those. It was in many ways like an early version of Google Glass, and he continues to work on augmented reality today. He's working with a company called Meta that's building augmented reality glasses. There's also Thad Starner. He's been building and wearing head-mounted computers since the early 90s, and like Steve Mann, he did a lot of his wearable computing work at MIT. Starner actually showed Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin one of his prototypes in 2003, and in 2010 they hired him as a technical lead for Google Glass. He's still working on Glass at Google. He's also working on some related research projects that use the technology. So augmented reality has been in the works for over 40 years, and it's bubbled up in pop culture in many, many ways. Maybe you've seen it in Terminator or any number of other movies. But it was only in the past 8 years or so that it really started becoming something that any of us could really use. And in my opinion, that's largely due to the rise of the smartphone. With smartphones, we got constant access to digital cameras, and also a deluge of apps. There were some augmented reality apps as early as 2008, like Wikitude had an augmented reality browser, and a mobile AR museum guide came from a German company called Metaio. So this is when I first saw augmented reality. It was on a smartphone in 2009 when Yelp added a feature to its app called Monocle. You might have seen it or used it. You could like move the phone around to get the general direction of restaurants and other businesses around you. This is outside of my office in San Francisco. You can see this screen printing place down the block. Apparently people really like it. And it was really basic, but at the time it seemed fantastic. And I thought, wow, this technology needs a ton of work, but you could do some really cool stuff with it. In the years since this came out, smartphones have gotten much more capable. Advances in processing power, mobile cameras, sensor technology have just really moved along. And this plus work to miniaturize technology and increasing interest in wearable gadgets by consumers means we're closer than ever to making augmented reality mainstream and truly useful. So where are we now? We're still a ways from having our own virtual pet monsters that we can play with and then just ignore and not have to clean up after, but the technology is getting better and better. At this point, augmented reality is a common theme in smartphone and tablet apps. WordLens, for instance, which overlaid translations of signs onto, translations of words on signs onto the signs themselves as you look at them through a smartphone, was purchased by Google, and now it's part of Google Translate. Other apps use it for things like advertising, viewing 3D models, understanding anatomy, or seeing how furniture might look in your home. It seems to me almost quaint at this point to see augmented reality on screens that we have to hold with our hands, but that's okay, because we're starting to see it in more immersive ways, blending digital images and reality. Here's one. This is a startup called Navdi. They're building a device that's a little bit like Google Glass for your car, but I feel like that kind of undersells it, because it's pretty cool. So it gives you turn-by-turn directions and other information on the windshield of your car on like a small area of it, essentially making the windshield an AR display. Another startup called Visera, this picture doesn't really do it justice. It's really cool. So they have this technology that stores can use to project real-looking fabric and patterns onto like sort of a blank canvas piece of furniture. This is like probably a beige couch in actuality. But if you have a small furniture store, you can show people all kinds of fabrics and choices and stuff like that just with a projector. And the idea of augmented reality still really focuses around glasses, though, despite these kinds of things. And those are coming, too, from companies large and small. Sony, Epson, Vuzix, Meta, and Recon Instruments are a few of the companies that have either released or plan to release AR glasses. And Magic Leap, as I mentioned earlier, has at least figured out some of the technological challenges of mixing these two. Now it's hard at work on the miniaturization, which should take the form of a headset given the non-working prototypes that I saw in their office that did look like glasses, kind of a sporty version of glasses. They haven't said when that will be available, but I'm hoping it'll happen in the next couple of years. Microsoft has also emerged as another strong augmented reality contender. in January, they showed off these. It's a spacey-looking kind of headset that could be used to do things like explore Mars, play Minecraft in the middle of your living room. I tried out a prototype in Redmond in March that was tethered to a computer, kind of this way from my head. It was bulky, it was really uncomfortable, and frankly, the images didn't look very good at all. I was kind of disappointed. But I saw it again at the end of April, and it had actually been shrunk down into that size and form factor, which was really surprising to me. And it could function fine without being connected to a computer. So it still has a bunch of technical challenges, but they're actually making really fast progress. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella recently said in a BBC interview that a developer version of it will be out within the next year, so we'll see. To get to this cool augmented reality future, though, we're going to have to solve some really huge problems. The displays in augmented reality glasses are going to have to be high resolution with really good viewing angles. Otherwise, you're going to feel like you're looking at the world one rectangle at a time, kind of like this, which was the experience that I had each time I used HoloLens. It's very weird and disconcerting if you've never tried it before. It's kind of like if you've got a mural in front of you and you're only allowed to see, like, you kind of have to like move your head to see each little piece of it, which is kind of lame. We're also going to need accurate gaze tracking, gesture recognition, and standardization of what those gestures are, if there are gestures. We are also used to doing swipes and taps and pinches and zooms on smartphones, but we haven't figured out an intuitive way to interact with augmented or virtual reality. Should we flick an index finger up and down? That's to select something. That's what HoloLens, Microsoft would have you do with HoloLens, or maybe use a handful of voice commands to say what we want, or both. That has to be sorted out for this stuff to work. Another big challenge is making these headsets comfortable and ensuring that they're safe to wear. They have to be lightweight. They have to fit a lot of people with not much fuss, which is really, really hard because we all have different heads. But even more important, the technology can't confuse our eyes and our brains by messing up our focus cues. Otherwise, some people, like me, will feel nauseous while wearing these things. It's a big problem right now for AR and virtual reality, and a lot of effort is going into figuring out how to fix it. And I, for one, will be very happy if and when it is figured out. Design and style are also really big issues. As you guys might have noticed, Google Glass had some big problems with this, especially with a product like that where we might want to wear our augmented reality technology outside of the house. I wouldn't wear a pair of augmented reality glasses in public that didn't look nearly indistinguishable from eyeglasses or sunglasses. I don't know about you guys, but I just don't think I would do that. And this was a huge problem for Google. You just couldn't ignore Google Glass, whether you were the one wearing it or the one looking at it. And the last big issue we've got still is we can't forget about price. If people are going to buy this stuff, it has to be affordable. Clearly, we've got a really long way to go, and it's likely to be years before we really figure out what augmented reality is the best for, assuming it even manages to make it into the mainstream, which with new technologies, as we all know, is never guaranteed. Despite the challenges, though, augmented reality is continuing to advance, and it's advancing really rapidly. In addition to those working on consumer devices, companies are trying it out in industrial settings, like Boeing, the same company where I mentioned before the phrase augmented reality was coined. They found in an internal study that augmented reality technology being used on a tablet actually made it faster and easier for trainees to put together a mock-up of an airplane wing. And the bits and pieces we've seen so far from companies like Magic Leap, Microsoft, Meta, and others are just a little bit of what we're going to be seeing soon. In the coming years, the technology is going to evolve even more rapidly, bringing it to a place where it's possible and even hopefully affordable for anyone to grab a pair of glasses and change the way you work and play in ways made more fantastic by augmented reality. And now we're going to bring up a couple guys who are right in the trenches of augmented reality, working on their own companies here in the Portland area. I'd like you guys to welcome Raven of Object Theory, Ryan of On The Go Platforms, and Milos from SpaceView. Let's sit down. Thank you for joining me, you guys.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming up from California.
Oh, you're welcome. So what I'd like you guys first to do is just introduce yourselves, even though I very, very briefly introduced you. Just say your company and briefly what it is that you do. You guys just want to go down the line. You want to start?
Yeah, I'm Brian Fink, the founder and CEO of On The Go Platforms. We're making a gesture interface. We're tackling the interface issue that comes along with these new devices. So we're using proprietary computer vision algorithms to basically recognize someone's gesture on any 2D camera.
I'm Raven Zachary, one of the founders of Object Theory, based here in Portland. My co-founder, Michael Hoffman, recently left the Microsoft HoloLens Studios team up in Redmond. He was commuting back and forth the grueling 4 hours every week for 18 months and said, I love Portland too much, I've got to stay here. So was able to convince him to leave that team and start a company building HoloLens augmented reality apps, mostly for enterprises and vertical markets.
Milos Jovanovic, we're founder and CEO of SpaceView, and we use augmented reality to create visualization tools. We're right now focused on doing mobile solutions for salespeople who sell physical products. So we enable them to take a photo or a live video with their mobile devices and place virtual objects to show their clients what the products will look like in real space.
First question I have for you guys is about where augmented reality is going. It's gotten, as you guys know, it's gotten a lot more common and a lot more useful over the past few years. What do you think needs to happen to make augmented reality something that the average person can use regularly?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing is the hardware, kind of as you touched on in your talk. Right now, you see a lot of companies that are trying to pack a lot into these devices that could be simplified and used for very simple use cases in enterprise situations. So I think there needs to be a lot of innovation done on the hardware, and then also on the interface as well.
Okay.
I'd say price point and portability. Unlike VR, where you're okay being tethered to a high-end processing computer and sitting in your office chair, AR really has the most benefit when you can work in a group, collaboratively, walk around a space. And so I think having portability on something that you can put onto your head, that means trading off performance for mobility. So you're going to see that initial, let's say, 3 to 5 year time frame. It's going to feel like technology that may even feel like a step behind in what you're used to with the power of a smartphone in your pocket or power of a high-end PC. But we're going to get there. And I think price point's key now. I think until you get this into a price point in the $1,000 to $3,000 range, you're not going to see mass market adoption of AR.
I think I consider AR as a part of kind of the whole 3D world. And 3D world has been around for a very long time. We see it in movies, we see it in specialized occasions, but the issue with 3D is that if it tries to be a part of reality, but it's not quite there, we as humans have an issue with that. And so I think a big step in accepting augmented reality for everyday use will be these wearable devices. But I feel like right now we can create very awesome augmented reality experiences on mobile devices as long as we don't try to do too much.
Okay. Raven, I got to go back to you because you just said something that piqued my interest. You were talking about price, and you said $1,000 to $3,000 perhaps, as just sort of a ballpark figure. To me, that even seems like a lot of money when I'm thinking of a consumer product. So can you expand a little bit on what you'd think we would get for that amount of money?
Absolutely. So to one extent, we're spoiled because in the United States, we have a carrier-subsidized smartphone model where you're used to paying $99, $199, maybe even nothing for a new smartphone. We're starting to see that shift. The carriers are looking to a different way of subsidizing phones. But remember, the first iPhone was $550 to $750, and you're paying now a laptop price somewhere between that and double that. To me, that's a reasonable high-end consumer price point. I don't think you're going to see everyone and their kids go out and buy a wearable AR headset at $2,400. But the notion of going today and buying a $30,000 or a $50,000 vertical market headset is just not an approachable opportunity for consumers or a lot of businesses.
And to that point, I think the people that will pay that is going to be more in the niche markets like the sports industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How important do you think augmented reality will become over the next several years? And what do you think that we'll be using it for? What are going to be some of the, I hate the phrase killer apps, but that's the easiest way to describe what we're thinking of. What are going to be the killer apps for AR in the next few years?
I really see AR and VR as the next way humans interact with technology. So if you think about web and then mobile, I think on the same scale, augmented and virtual reality will take over. So it's going to happen incrementally. But if you think about just the parallels between mobile and AR, to me, are just fascinating. For example, we're talking about killer apps. Just think about when smartphones came out, right? What were the killer apps? What were the reasons why would you buy a smartphone? And right, that wasn't so long ago. So I definitely feel like that AR will be a much better way for us to interact with technology.
I think initially killer apps are going to be for vertical markets. So you're in a business now where being able to see 3D in a 3D environment fundamentally is a better experience than seeing 3D on a 2D screen. That could be industrial design, that could be automotive, could be high-end retail where you're customizing an experience with a customer, with a guided assistant in the retail environment. I think where I want to go, why I'm passionate about this space and why I started Object Theory is this notion that, you know, by the year 2020, and forgive the funny play on the 2020 vision here for AR, that we're, you know, many of us are going to be schizophrenics with glasses. You know, where we're going to see this moving is this notion of, you look at technologies like Siri and Cortana today that are these search engine interfaces for intelligent agents. Where we're headed, I think, in the next 5 to 7 years is a lot of people having augmented reality glasses with some sort of personified intelligence, whether that be a character. You mentioned in your talk this notion of a pet that you don't have to clean up after. I think we're going to have this externalized brain represented in some sort of character that comes with us in our daily lives, provides insight and support, a virtual advisor in our daily travels that's a private advisor that only you can really perceive. And I think that's going to really fundamentally change human interaction, how societies communicate. I mean, there's a lot of very profound philosophical stuff with AR that I didn't have in my prior world of being in the smartphone industry. This is pretty profound stuff that we're headed into.
Yeah, so there's a company called Blipar, which I think you might have mentioned. Yeah. They're working on a visual search. So basically Google, but for the real world. So with wearables and something that you're wearing every day, being able to kind of, you know, set the internet free and having that information at your fingertips for things that you're actually looking at and interacting with the real world, I think it's going to be very powerful.
Okay. What kind of mixed reality experiences are you guys really hoping to see? Things that blend reality and augmented reality into digital imagery and real things?
I think initially it's going to be something that's very specific for a specific use case. For example, okay. Doctors in surgery rooms, the ability to really kind of help out specific problems. And again, with new technology, it's really important for us to identify specific problems and solve those problems very, very well, versus trying to do everything poorly. So I really see it wherever there's a need for visualization of some sort in a very specific case.
I think one of the challenges that we're going to have is how do we adapt to interactions in the physical world with people wearing bulky glasses on our faces, much more than sunglasses. And we saw a little bit of this with Google Glass. Unfortunately, that became a conversation around privacy and video recording. You know, society rejected that for good reason by many people's accounts. I think what might take societal adoption of AR glasses is something as simple as automotive safety, where by putting on this device while I'm driving in my commute from home to work, knowing that I have this technology on my face that can provide not only navigation, but safety warnings for bicyclists and pedestrians, it may be that one specific application and one specific use case is what creates a comfort level by our society in wearing these technologies.
So I think a really cool application for it is it makes the average Joe a professional. So for instance, you could be, one of the experiences I had with the Microsoft HoloLens is I've never changed a lighting fixture or anything. I'm not very good at that type of stuff. But I was wearing HoloLens and I Skyped with someone and they were able to circle the tools that I was looking at, circle and kind of guide me through on what to do. And bringing that kind of expert opinion to any field, you automatically get experts that, you know, are just off the street. And I think that could, yeah, be really powerful.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about potential pitfalls. I mean, are there some ways that AR could prove to be dangerous? I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is just distraction. I mean, could it make us more distracted if we're focused on digital things in our field of view and there are real things that we're not really looking out for?
So not if augmented reality is done right, I don't think.
Okay, well.
Because there are companies out there, I mean, with the lack of standardization becomes a problem. There's companies who kind of have this information floating in front of you, and that's what a lot of us see in some of these concept videos. And I don't think that's the method that's going to win. Okay. You really need to augment physical objects So it's, I'm looking at a sign and it's augmented, or I'm looking at a bike that I'm working on and the fuel tank's augmented and I'm able to interact with it and collaborate over it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an important question to ask. I think it's one that it tends to be more relevant in the VR space where you're dealing with physical hazards around completely obstructed views, especially when you generally have this tethered cable kind of running down behind your head to kind of do a PC. I've had friends who've tripped and fallen while wearing VR, and you can hurt yourself pretty badly. In AR, because it's an additive technology to what you're seeing. Ideally, when these hardware platforms are coming out, they're using industrial design that does not obstruct the view of your environment. It's an additive technology. I think the hardware decisions around industrial design are going to make a huge difference in this case.
AR headsets will be very personal devices. So I feel like historically, again, if you look at adoption of smartphones, there's still fear of how much are we engaged in our day-to-day interactions when we have our smartphones always tethered to our pockets and things like that. So this is not a black and white thing. It's always it's a gray area, and people who are developing these technologies have the responsibility to kind of correct and make experiences be done well in order for this to work.
Okay. I've got one more question for you guys, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. What's just one aspect of AR that you're excited to see develop a lot more in the coming year, and why are you excited about it? Don't all answer at once.
Okay, I'll start big picture. I know you said in the next year, but I'm going to talk more about
it can be
the
further
philosophical stuff
okay.
here, which is we as a species interact in a three-dimensional environment. And when you think back, whether you believe that the Earth is 10,000 years old or you believe it's 100 million years old, it's the same issue. We as a species have grown up interacting with objects in a 3D environment. We learn as infants to grasp objects. We have senses that are inherent to our physical nature. And augmented reality is taking technology and making that complementary to how we as a species already interact in our environment, where in the last 40 years, we've been dealing with rectangles and squares in a two-dimensional environment when we interact with technology. So there's this huge shift where technology is becoming complementary to our physiology. And that's a big change. I know it may take a long time for us to come to terms with that, but it is a fundamental rethink of how technology is in our environments.
Yeah, I just want to tie on to that. It's visualization. We're basically experiencing a paradigm shift between experiencing technology on a two-dimensional plane versus visualizing it in 3D. It's a fundamental shift that's going to make how we interact with technology much more native and much easier.
I think I'm just most excited for the technology to finally be here. In 2010, we created an augmented reality running app, and since then, it's always been the next year, but not until recently have we actually seen these devices been able to get small enough and the displays good enough to finally be here. So 2016, I think, is going to be a really exciting year.
Cool. Can we open it up to the audience and do a few questions? Is that possible? I can't see any of you, so I don't actually know if anyone has any questions.
Hi there. My father suffered a stroke in his right hemisphere, and to correct his vision, there's different types of prism lenses that they tried because his eyes were fine. It was just the way that his brain processes vision. Are you aware of any companies that are pursuing medical uses for AR, or is that something that's just not going to happen in this century?
Well, there's definitely a lot of therapeutic research going on to both VR and AR. In fact, here in Portland, there's an academic working on Parkinson's research with the University of Oregon around how you can do mobility in a virtual environment and have it affect some sort of physical therapy for a Parkinson's patient. I think you'll see work there. I don't have enough knowledge about that specific physical condition to determine whether a binocular technology would actually help in any way in terms of therapeutic, but I think it's a great area for opportunity. There's some great research on burn patients overcoming long-term pain using relaxation technology in VR that's mind-blowing to think about the way in which our brains process information. And even though it's a virtual experience, our brain is processing it as a real experience. Pretty profound stuff.
Hi there. I was wondering your perspective on whether you think AR and VR will ultimately sort of merge into a single technology, or if they'll stay distinct and have their own separate places.
I think initially they're going to probably stay separate. And the reason is that they both have their strengths and weaknesses. And so I think we are still in the infancy of this industry, and so we really need to make those two different experiences very, very well before we can start thinking about merging them together.
Yeah, so I think virtual reality really brings you into this virtual world where augmented reality augments your reality. And in the near future, I don't think there's going to be too much overlap, but as the technologies continue to refine and whatnot, there may be some sort of overlap where you can, switch between the two and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the long-term 10 or 15-year roadmap probably is the same. I think the challenge that VR has in front of it is the gender balance issue. I was speaking to a software company that builds exclusively VR software, and they mentioned that they had a 98% male user base. You cannot have transformational technology in this world with a 98% male user base. So VR needs to figure out the gender gap problem. It's not an issue for AR in any way that's similar to VR. VR is really exciting for things like relaxation, therapy, sports, and entertainment. A lot of those categories aren't as gender balanced by nature. And so I think VR its risk may be a niche market where AR could be coming out of the gate a very broadly applicable market.
Hi, thanks for the conversation. I was just wondering more on like a design level, what you guys do on a daily basis, how you get, how you actually implement this stuff. Thanks.
That's funny you say that because behind stage we said on a daily basis we do I-9s, W-4s, health insurance, payroll processing.
That's true. So SpaceU, we've decided to really focus on mobile devices because they're here now. And in that, instead of trying to make an ultimate killer app, we're trying to create experiences that are very rudimentary and basic and make those really, really well before we continue refining. And so we are kind of in this era where we're really excited about the future heads-up hardware, but are trying to make things that can be useful today on mobile devices. And design-wise, again, I think it's really important for us to pick specific use cases and try to make them as simple as possible.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge is trying to not do too much because it's really easy to get taken away in this type of technology. We're also a little different. We're not creating an AR platform. We're creating the interface for it. So a lot of our time spent figuring out how to integrate with the different AR platforms out there like Vuforia, Mateo, Wikitude, and also how people actually interact with this content when it's out in front of them. It turns out it's a really difficult problem because if it's too complex, the learning curve is going to be too great. And we work with a lot of enterprises, and they're just looking for, a simple way to navigate this new technology. So in the short future, it's just figuring out what that simple interaction should be.
My company, Object Theory, is very much kind of in this heritage of Portland being a strong market for digital agencies. So we very much can be classified as a digital agency specific to the AR space, and more specifically, the Microsoft HoloLens space. So we build apps for clients. That includes coding and design and testing and all sorts of skills that are similar to, but not necessarily the exact same as the skills we've had for website design and mobile app development.
Thank you guys so much for being here. It was great to have you talk. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.